fake being happy. Okay?
Yikes. Kevin and Chad Franke have spoken to People magazine for an upcoming documentary that they're doing, and it is beyond belief, and we're going to talk about that interview in today's video. Hello Sofa Squad and welcome back to the sofa. There's not a sofa back there, but there's a bed right there, and there's a little bow right over there. Luke's over there in his little cage. And my name's Paul if you're new to the channel. If you're not new to the channel, well, my name's still Paul. Now, like I said, what we're doing today is we're going to be looking at a People magazine article and interview. This is from Kevin Franke. This is from Chad Franke. By the time you're seeing this, the new Hulu docuseries would have come out, but we're specifically just talking about this little interview or whatever. So what I want to do for this is I want to first go over this article with a few talking points and then look at the video clips, a few of those from the interview, and use those as talking points. So let's go ahead and get on into it. You'll see here on the screen, it says that this is by Casey Baker, and this was February 25th, and you see convicted YouTube mom Ruby Franke's husband Kevin asked her to stop writing from prison. This is an exclusive. So let's just get into some of the highlights of the article. This article and interview is in preparation for the docuseries that's coming up. And one of the complicated things about this case is Kevin Franke. Kevin Franke is technically still married. We'll get into that. But, you know, he's the estranged husband of Ruby Franke, who is now obviously in prison. And the complicated feelings that come with that. So I'm going to put this first little clip of the article up here. And you'll see there it says, you know, despite everything, Kevin says that he still has those feelings for Ruby. Now I'm going to go ahead and quote this second paragraph. It says, I'm not ashamed to say that after being married for over 20 years to that woman, I truly did and still do love her. Now he does continue on. Let's look at this next little clipping here. And again, I'll just quote from here directly. It says, but that doesn't excuse what she did. It doesn't excuse how she hurt our children and how she hurt me. Now that second thing, he says there's some bridges you just can't cross and then cross back. She burned those bridges, so I'm moving on. Now, here's the thing. If you follow me with this case or the case yourself, you're just following me, whatever. Either way, if you follow this case, right? Sherry Franke, one of Ruby's daughters, wrote a book recently. We did it in the members book club, and it was amazing. If you've not read it, my God, go out right now and get it. So amazing book. She did the audible version to it with her own voice, which I really liked. And this is the thing, because this gets very complicated. Obviously, Ruby is still, you know, her mother, Kevin's, you know, estranged wife, what do you even call her? Yeah, but there's just some lines that were crossed, right? And clearly that took place here. Now, a lot of people have certain feelings about Kevin, and he will address those, and we'll get to those in 1 second, but let's continue with the article for now. Now, this next little clipping here, it talks about the docuseries, and it talks about them, you know, their social media stardom. Remember, they had this channel, 8 Passengers, and it says here in the thing, you know, the height of it, they're making $100 grand a month, okay? That's a lot of money, obviously. Now, it says that by 2020, 8 Passengers had 2.5 million subscribers. Kevin said in this interview, and you see it in the last paragraph here, you know, Ruby loved the validation. And again, even from Sherry's book that she did, we get that sense that this was really a defining thing for Ruby. She really went all in with the channel, with the subs, with the validation that it seemed to give her. But it also sits here and does go into that dark side of it, where some of her behavior became very questionable, and people started questioning the punishments and just the vibe of it all together, okay? Calling child protective services, things of this nature. Now, it does kind of conclude here with talking about how they're trying to finalize this divorce. They are still technically married, and it does say that, you know, he asked the prison to, like, hey, I don't want her to write me anymore. He didn't like the way that the letters were making him feel, like whatever was going on there, whatever she was saying, and he would not elaborate on that, and nor would he or Chad speak about the other siblings and whatnot. So that part right there I found very interesting, and I can only imagine the things she was probably going on about in these letters, because if you watch this and you watched her at the sentencing, and even though she did more than Jodi at sentencing with, you know, claiming I'm sorry, on the same note, you know, I didn't believe it. Okay, I don't believe it was sincere. And so I imagine these letters, there's no telling what she was saying in those. I think probably the real Ruby was still trying to come through in those. She's probably victim blaming them and doing all sorts of stuff. I mean, who knows? It's complete self-speculation at this point. Now what I want to do is I want to move to some of those video clips, look at those, use those those as talking points and then finish things off.
A lot of the physical violence that was described was hidden and kept from me. I didn't even know.
Now, Kevin will speak about this in the interview, and I'm sure he'll go more into it in the docuseries that comes out. And this is a question that a lot of people had was, what exactly did he know? Did they not know? And he'll go into it more. But that's one of the issues that people take with, and one of my issues too was, well, what did you know was going on? And how much of it was Jodi's fault and Ruby's fault? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? But he addresses, the armchairing, if you will, that the public has done, the timeline and all that. So let's hear what he has to say about that.
Those directives came from Jodi, the licensed mental health counselor.
And I think that's a definitely, a hard spoonful of sugar to swallow for a lot of people, right? Is the fact that this came from Jodi and her level of manipulation. And even just watching this interview, watching this take place, what he's saying, essentially he's like, you know what? This is a slow burn. She wasn't coming in hot on the first day, basically, right? And again, the fact that she's a licensed mental health therapist, I mean, I'm a pretty big advocate of, therapy and doing what you got to do and, presenting things to a qualified person to talk, through and whatnot, right? So I'm sitting here imagining like the situations I currently have going with my own therapist. And if they started to do something weird or that made me uncomfortable, now mind you, I don't have a 5-year relationship with them like they talk about here, but nonetheless, it brings things into a different perspective. Now, again, that's my experience. That was Kevin's experience. Each of those doesn't validate the other or invalidate the other, or, well, just because my thing was this way, that doesn't mean that, everybody else's should be that way. I mean, I get that, right? So these are the nuances of this case that make it very complicated, but also very heartbreaking at the same time because of the end result of it.
If, it was day number 1 and Jodi came to me and said, yeah, you're selfish. You need to go into separation and repent. I would have told her to take a hike.
Now, this part right here is what I'm talking about. So him saying like, yeah, she came in day 1 hot like she did, talking about this, talking about that, about this crazy stuff. 100% you would expect anyone to be like, get out of my house, get out of my children's lives, get out, like whatever. Now, also what he's dealing with going on here, and I want to be clear that I'm not trying to absolve Kevin of any kind of accountability in this or anything like that, because I still have tons of questions that I hope are answered in the docuseries. But, he's also dealing with Jodi, who, the way Sherry described it, and again, if you read her book or follow me for that, Sherry's like, I did the receipts on this. I went to them. I was like, look, this is who you're sending us to counseling. She's done boom, 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 boom. And it was, nope, Ruby wasn't going to hear for it. My theory is that because Ruby was so focused on the next level of, I don't even know what you would call it, like in her career and her YouTube and her pretending to be like the end all be all mother, her biblical narcissism, whatever you want to call that she had going on. I think she was completely focused on that.
There was that coercion and flipping it back onto me, the gaslighting, that I was like, okay, well, maybe I am wrong.
Now, this is the part that I've seen so many comments, and I've even commented on it before, of how one allows and lets and this kind of seep in. And, I'm obviously, like I always like to say, I'm not a therapist, not a cop, not a lawyer, none of that fancy credentialed stuff. Okay. So I'm completely aware of that. And I'm especially not a cult expert, because one thing that I see going on here, and especially like the cases that we follow that involve these like cult hive-like mentalities, is this right here, where they somehow are able to get in and just break you down and slowly do this and that and the other. Again, the fact that he had Ruby doing all this stuff alongside of it doesn't help either. That being said, I also completely understand the argument of, no, doesn't matter. When ABC starts happening to your kids, you pack it up and go somewhere, right? So it's very complicated on that level. Now, one thing also that comes up with me listening to this, and he mentioned this as well, was that the timeline was like essentially collapsed. And I don't know if we've gotten to the clip yet, or if it's just from the notes that I made in my phone about it, but I'll go ahead and speak to it so I don't forget it. So he's talking about like the public's timeline of this has collapsed. And I think that's one thing that takes place with a lot of true crime, whether it's docuseries or the TV shows that, depict court cases and things like this. We watch it from this perspective of, number one, hindsight. So we have all the information essentially coming out at once or in 3 different hours, versus living it day to day, or the tidied up court cases of, well, by the end of it, we've solved this 20-year, cold case that we have no idea all the intrinsities that went into doing it. So I can respect what he's saying about that dynamic, because I'm just like, yes, totally get it. Yeah, I am guilty of that from my own perspective of being like, oh, well, this just all happened in like a year or this or that. So, there's that. Now, on that same note, there were people who watched this play out in real time who like grew up watching Eight Passengers, or parents whose kids were watching it and started to see the turn of like, I don't know if I like this anymore. And then the way Sherry described it is it was a complete you-know-what show when her mother switched over to Jodi's like connections and started doing that. And it basically became like a cringe binge, right? Where people were going over there like, what's going on here? Like, let's see how bad of a you-know-what show this is.
I was also required to move out of the house and never contact my siblings, never go back home. So
now this part's so heartbreaking because this is what I think he said he was 17 when he did this. Jodi has him living out of the house, doing this, doing that. You can't talk to your siblings, you can't do this, you can't do that. And I remember in Sherry's book her talking about going to visit him, and he acted so like, what are you doing here? Why are you here? And she was so confused and hurt by it. Well, here you see. Now again, Chad will go into even just an interview where it's like, I loved Jodi at this time. She was my therapist. I knew her for 5 years. I thought that this was what you did. And again, that perspective, I'm like, I can imagine, especially if you're a kid, right? You don't know any different. You know what I'm saying? I'm not trying to say like a 17-year-old doesn't have any kind of wherewithal, but you're 17, okay? You know what I'm saying? If you've been doing this since you were 12 or whatever, and judging from Sherry's book, Chad had some behavioral stuff going on that didn't seem out of the ordinary, but definitely his parents wanted to incorporate Jodi and therapy and this, that, and the other, whatever. So my heart aches when you hear the children's story. And we still haven't even heard the perspective of, the other one, right? Not publicly in a big way. Obviously Sherry's and some of Chad's that we'll hear upcoming. But knowing what we know that they went through, especially the ones that were jumping out of Jodi's windows and stuff like that to go get help, how do you undo that damage?
I don't know a single family content creator that did not have interactions like that with their children.
Now, what he's talking about in that clip is, remember that beginning clip that we opened up with where Jodi's like, just act happy. Both Kevin and Chad will talk about like, this is just kind of par for the course. And apparently for this docuseries, they handed over the unedited footage and whatnot. Now, even Chad will say, oh yeah, we went to these, sponsored trips and like, this is just what family vloggers did. Like, you're doing multiple takes, you're doing this, you're doing that. The family vlogging thing, as we've seen, is, I don't know at what point they'll and how they'll incorporate laws for that, but we hear nightmare after nightmare after nightmare coming out of this, and Sherry is kind of becoming like a spokesperson, a poster child for this. This is a very extreme case. Think about how many cases might not involve the harm that was being done to them, but it's more just the psychological part of, okay, kids, we're going to Disney World and we've planned out every second of the trip. It's not like a real trip, it's like a working trip, right? That kind of a thing. Or, everyone has to pretend to do this on camera. The fakeness of it is what I'm getting at. So I want to now refer to some of my notes that I wrote down from watching this, the other parts of it, and talk about those and use those as a reference point for talking. I talked about the collapse timeline that we spoke about, and him saying that the horrible things that Jodi did were happening. This went on for a long time. It was a slow burn to what we saw, and then, her kicking him out of the house and all that. He says that, however, Ruby was very strict and learned a lot of that behavior from her own parents. He also says that Ruby and Jodi set the boundaries in the house. This was very difficult because they could cross them whenever they wanted to, and he could not. Now, just on those three things right there, yes, from what I understand, Ruby, this seems to be how they grew up or whatever, in this very strict. And I think one thing, and I'll use this as an example, if you're familiar with this, you know what I'm talking about with the forgotten lunch video, where one of the children, one of the very young ones, forgets the lunch, and Ruby flips out, and I don't want anyone bringing them food, at school, and they're going to learn this lesson. And it's like, remember, the kids are getting up and like finding their own way to school and like making their own food and like kind of like crazy stuff, right? For very young children. So some of these behaviors are one of the things like with Kevin where I question, okay, was that a Jodi thing? Because I don't don't know if that was or not. I mean, I don't know, so I can't say. But I know that a lot of people have issues with even some of the, what Kevin and Ruby might consider milder things, right? Now, I could completely understand. Let's paint a different picture here. Let's paint a picture of you have a small child, you're trying to teach them some form of responsibility to make their lunch or do this or that. I'm talking, this is a young child, right? So just the fact that if she was like even making her lunch and remembering to do it twice a week and then forgot it, great. Let me see what I can do to fix this. Now, if this was a 17-year-old who perpetually was doing something, I don't know what, right? But you're trying to teach them like accountability, like, no, you know what? Guess what? You didn't bring your lunch. Well, you're going to use your whatever money that you have from this to, you go buy yourself lunch. Or they have more agency is what I'm getting at, right? But what we saw as the public was, and this is at least for me, was a raging narcissistic mother who utilized a moment for her own self-gratification at the expense of a very young child who doesn't know better. Imagine what those teachers, and you know somebody gave that poor little thing food, I would hope. Imagine what those teachers thought about that. I mean, bless her heart, right? It's just, it's that kind of stuff. And again, we're talking about Ruby making, $100,000 a month doing content, okay? She could have run to school to drop some food off or said, is there something that you could do? I'll get you back when I come pick her up. I got $5, whatever, okay? But that's just one example that people are taking issue with Kevin, and that's a mild part of this, right, with the behavior. Also, another place that I see people take a lot of issue with is like when he was just like, okay, well, I'll move out of the house and never speak to the kids again. That was kind of like, and so it's here, I don't want to say it's here nor there at this point because it's not my battle. Like, I didn't live through this, right? Only the kids and him can move forward and remend their relationships. And on that note, let's go over to here where Chad even says he has no contact with Ruby anymore. He says maybe later. And he describes a situation where he's essentially just like, I don't have that feeling when I go home with like, oh gosh, mom's not here. He's like, I don't have that at all. It's like a completely different feeling. And I mean, who would, right? It must be a very different kind of loss that one would experience, I imagine. Now, also, this is where the dad, Kevin, says, yeah, she was writing me these letters, and then he went to the DOC and was like, look, these are not good. I don't like the way these are making me feel. I don't like what's in these letters. I want her to stop writing. He's still trying to get divorced from the woman, right? I mean, come on. Now he says, yeah, we're still technically married. Now they do talk about where Chad moved in soon after the arrest with Kevin because the counselors, not Jodi obviously, were like, look, this would be a good way to form a bond. And then I believe Chad said when he was like 19 or 20, somewhere in there, he moved out because he essentially, it was feeling like two roommates, and again, if you're thinking like a 20-year-old living with your dad, you know what I'm saying? Like, they're going to be wanting to do their thing. Kevin's going through a lot too, right? I mean, this whole level of like, there has to be, if he really was brainwashed and really going through this and that veil is lifted off of him, he too is going to have a, whoa, okay, well, how does life look? But they both made it sound like, at least just in this interview, that did help them form a bond and they're starting new family traditions and moving on. And I can only imagine, it gives me goosebumps, that to be able to do basic stuff in that house without a camera shoved in your face and a phone recording you is a breath of fresh air. Because one thing I really took from studying this case and Sherry's book and what we've done with it so far is just that everything was fake, everything was pretend, everything was monetized, everything was this or that. Obviously I'm not a family content creator, like I'm just sitting here talking to y'all, right? Even though we feel like family, but you know what I'm saying. I know what goes into just sitting here doing a talking head video. I cannot fathom wrangling several children around to do A, B, C, D, and E, right? And then trying to capitalize on each of those moments. I mean, even for me, like I'll be out doing stuff. I'm like, Paul, you really should like photograph this for like Instagram or this or that. And I'm like, I just want to live in the moment. Like I'll get this out of the other, but I can't imagine going to the lengths that this did. Now, granted, they were making $100,000 a month, right? I mean, so for that money, you're going to be like, well, I'll record everything. But the expense and cost of what? Right? It's one thing to be like, I personally myself am making the choice. I have the agency to decide for myself that I'm going to be on camera 24 hours a day. Children don't. And I think that the work that Sherry is doing to try and create laws and help pass things to help prevent what happened to them moving forward is amazing and beautiful. And regardless of how I might feel about Kevin and what took place, all that, I hope they can mend relationships, him with his children, reform something, recalibrate, whatever you want to call it, and move on to happier, healthier times. So we will do a live chat after the thing drops for sure. And then I'll do another video to like talk about it over here with that. So that's it. If you're still watching, I greatly appreciate it. And if you could drop some little sofas off down in the comment section below for Rosco in spirit, for Bo who's behind me, for Luke who's over there with his little chewy thing or whatever, and for the rest of the sofa squad. So I'll have a place to sit and hang out and talk about this case, all the other cases we talk about here at the sofa squad. And until we meander on down there to do that, I'll see y'all soon. I just wanted to say thank you again for watching the whole video, and also thank you for being part of the Sofa Squad. Special thanks to all the Patreon members, channel members from both of my channels, everybody who likes, shares, subscribes, comments in the comment sections. It helps the channel out so much. Now don't forget, I do have that other channel, the podcast channel. That's where we go live, we hang out, we talk. We have kind of sort of a schedule, but just be sure and check it out. I'll put it up here on the screen. And then like I said in the beginning of the video, if you want to follow me and Rosco on the Instagram, go on, check it out. It's right here on the screen again. But once again, thank you very much. I really appreciate you being part of the Sofa Squad, and I'll see you in the next video.